Good morning, good evening. My name is Busiso Xaba. I'm the National Chairperson of the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, PAC. We are on the platform of the National Liberatory Congress, Youth League. We are in the party school looking at a very important topic on reflections on transiting different stages of the revolution. Today we have a special guest. We will introduce our guest a little bit later, the guest that we are familiar with on this platform. But before we go to our guest, let me start with Comrade, the youth president. Over to you just to open for us this political school of this week.
Izwe lethu National Chairperson sivusele ema-Africa sivusele nawe ku-Comrade General Comrade Fihla for availing himself to capacitate and sharpen ema-comrades ethu la khona lana and siyethemba because this Zoom political school ihamba a long way ifike igcine kufinyelele nakulawo makucabane lamanye lokhanza ukuthi akakhoni kungena lana, but because the cadres who are here ayayihambisa le message in their portfolios lapho akhona khona. Maybe to touch kule ndzaba transition to freedom, comrade, is an interesting topic and interesting discussion. Maybe comrade National Chair, I will say ukuthi i-NNLC standisayo sidzala liyasibeka yathi manje ke it will not partake in Mswati tinkundla non-democratic elections. They will never, because the organization is formed under democratic principles. Kungako bona ngeke participate in non-democratic elections because the constitution or the 2005 constitution le drive le tinkundla elections. It does not have the interest of our people, but it only serves the interest of the monarchy. Ukuthi vumele le monarchy ukuthi iluthe ama resources eMaswati ukuthi iluthe ama resources eMaswati in their own interest. But what happened in the current situation, there is this move that says we should fight within, we must attend tinkundla elections, we must do whatever. But those are discussion that have been ideas that have been coming from our fellow organizations, other organizations that are in the struggle for freedom, comrades. Siyabonga leadership. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Today we have a special guest to lead our discussion. Comrade Fihla is the national chairperson of APLAMVA, which is a military veteran association that look after the cadres who fought for the liberation in Azania, the so-called South Africa. He has wide experience in various areas of leadership. Hence, we find him a suitable person to challenge us tonight in the era of transition to freedom. Over to you, Comrade Fihla.
Ngiyabonga Chair. Izwe lethu mAfrika mahle. Izwe lethu mAfrika mahle.
Yeah.
Sengimangele sengithi mhlambe our comrades bakhohliwe ukuthi bangama-Afrika. Ngiyazwakala kahle Chair. Okay, thanks my Africa. When I was preparing the Lokuza for a discussion tonight, I was not sure exactly what is the context in which I should put then Zabaleye a transition. So what I then decided to do, ukuthi ngiyenze ibe general. But as it is general, we shall keep on reflecting to the actual situation for Eswatini. But what I will put are just the guiding pillars of a transition, especially from a violent situation which you went through or we are still in Eswatini. And the people that are calling for the participation in the elections, maybe they are looking at the movement away from the violent environment that we are currently in. Maybe they are hoping that tomorrow there will be peace and prosperity in Eswatini. So we shall look at the pillars of a transition and look at the situation in Eswatini and whether the time is right enough now for you to participate in the transition. Because the elections are an end product. They are supposed to be an end state, not a transition. You go for elections, they've been gone through a certain process, which is a transition. Now, you must go for elections. Now, that is the end state. You can't go for elections having not gone through a certain transition and look at the pillars of that transition. Now, the first question that we needed to ask yourself is, why do we go through interim or transitional arrangements in politics? So we need to look into that question. And if we agree with the answers to this question, then it will be easy to discuss all other issues. But if we don't agree with the answers, with the questions to this question, then we shall have a problem. Now, in the first place, transitional arrangements are put in place for managing the process from conflict to peace. Now, that is the purpose of transitional arrangements. It means we are in a situation of conflict, of turmoil, whether there was a coup, whether there is a mass action, there are uprisings, like it is the case in Swaziland, where we are challenging the status quo. You want a democratic state. And your challenge to the status quo is responded to in a violent manner, as we have seen in Lagapo Eswatini. So it means we are in a state of conflict. And for you to move out of this state of conflict towards a future end state, it means there must be some transitional period. There must be some transitional process before you can talk about the elections. Somehow you are correct to challenge those who are saying come and participate in the elections, because we have not prepared for those elections. Now, a transitional arrangement is meant to prepare you and everybody else who's a participant for those elections. Now, the transitional arrangements basically means that parties to the conflict have a common desire to move from conflict to peace. Now, I don't know whether in Ngapo Eswatini, all of you have got a common desire to move from conflict to peace, meaning that the monarch is ready and prepared to move from the current state where they respond violently to your wishes, and you yourselves, whether you have a common desire to sit with the monarch, with the powers that be, to sit down and look at the future. And currently, listening from you, it means the future as defined by the monarch is pushed through the elections that we are rejecting. Now we are going towards elections which are based on nothing that we have prepared through the transitional period. Now, if I may just ask a question for now before I continue, is there a common desire ngapho eSwatini to move from the current state towards a future peaceful state, which possibly will be defined by a new democratic constitution? Is there a common desire in that regard? Maybe if I can have one or two quick comrades responding. Now, also one of the questions I would like to ask, which is one of the pillars also of the transitional period, is who initiates the move towards peace? We are talking about elections now, that there's a call for elections. Now, who has initiated that move? And are all the other parties willing to participate in that move? Now, listening from you, are not willing to participate in those elections, while some of the other parties are willing to participate in those elections. What that means, therefore, is that there is no common desire to go to that elections. Some of the parties want to go and participate in those elections, which are called upon by a monarch, and you, comrades, are not keen, and possibly other mass organizations as well, are not keen to participate in those elections. This, however, does not mean that you are not willing to move towards peace, but it is the process that is the problem to you. How do you go towards that end state, which is peaceful? Again, before you can be able to go to that peaceful end state, you need to have a common understanding or agreement on the nature of the current problem. The problem that has led to the violence that you have in your country. Now, if the problem is about power, which is vested currently in the monarch, and you, comrades, are challenging the monarch in terms of that power, how will the monarch be ready then to give you a proper process of elections such that you can have a democratic government? If you have not sat down together and look at interim processes and structures and principles, including the interim constitution and the future constitution, which is going to, on which those elections are going to be based. Now, it's easy to go through elections, but those elections are still going to be based on the current constitution, which gives the monarch unquestionable power, which therefore means the elections that are being called upon may not necessarily serve your interest, because they're still based on the very same constitution that we are challenging. They're still based on the very same status quo that we are challenging. So it means you do not have a transitional mechanism or a transitional period through which you can sit down and look at the current causes of the conflict and the possible solutions to that conflict, and agree on the steps that need to be taken towards a peaceful end state, which all of you have got to agree upon. Now, the elections that are called upon are not necessarily a solution, because we have not sat down to look at the causes of the problems and the solutions to those problems, and therefore define the path towards the end state that all of you agree upon. Now, that's the critical challenge that you're having. It is therefore not surprising that you are rejecting the issue of the elections once others are accepting them. It's because you have not gone through this process of transition, of sitting down and looking at all these questions that I am asking. Now, if all these questions that I'm raising now cannot be answered, now it becomes a serious problem, because it means peace and stability will not be restored. The purpose of a transitional period is to initiate a process to restore peace and calm in the country. And it is to enable the process to resolve that conflict and develop mechanism towards a democratic dispensation. Now, if that is not in place, it means we do not have a mechanism towards a democratic dispensation in the country. It means we have not sat down to define the mechanisms for conflict resolution. It means peace and calm for now cannot be attained in Eswatini. Even if people can go for elections and get the results from the elections, the end result will still be the same. There will still be this uprising. There will still be violent reaction from the monarch and from the government. So the elections that are called upon may not necessarily address the problem, but they may even make the situation worse because they are a shortcut in trying to address the current problem that exists in Eswatini. Now, transitional mechanisms are basically a bridge. We need to understand them in that context. They are a bridge towards an end state, and therefore must be carefully crafted. Those mechanisms must be carefully crafted such that the end state can be clearly defined. As matters stand currently, Eswatini, the monarch has got its own end state to maintain the status quo and is unwavering in that regard. It's not prepared to change. The revolutionary forces are looking at all possible options to make sure that they overthrow the status quo. And we have these people in between who are opportunistic, who are prepared to take whatever comes their way to be able to benefit. Hence, those ones are prepared to go for elections because that may present an opportunity for them to be able to benefit from what is happening currently in Eswatini. Now, for me, I want to put a position which says those who are rejecting the current elections must be able to put an argument on the table. They must be able to say elections for what? If the constitution remains the same, if the status quo remains the same. Now, elections will be elections for what? Now, if that question is not answered, then they need to be able to put a proposal on the table to say a transitional period is required to be able to look at the current problems and how such problems can be resolved. To be able to look at the current constitution and see how this current constitution can be amended. Of course, this will be a difficult task because in Eswatini, when you speak about the amendment of the constitution, we are basically challenging the status quo. We are basically challenging the power of the monarchy. And we are basically pushing for a situation whereby the country is going to be democratized and is going to be ruled on the basis of a democratic constitution. Now, that's the challenge that yourselves have in the country. And that challenge, therefore, puts a question mark whether it is possible at this point in time, that side, Eswatini, to be able to have a transitional type of a situation before you go for elections. The monarch has imposed this process of elections because that process of elections basically maintains the status quo. And those who are supporting it are basically supporting it to maintain the status quo. And those who are challenging the process of elections are challenging it because they are challenging the status quo. So it therefore means that there is no consensus towards that process of elections. And if there's no consensus, then it means the status quo in terms of conflict in the country remains. It's a question of how does that conflict develop? Does it develop into an armed conflict where those who are opposing the status quo will be prepared to take up arms and overthrow the government by violent means? Or is it going to develop in a manner such that those who are challenging the status quo surrender and accept going towards the elections and so on and so on? These are the issues then that have got to be looked at, and yourselves, comrades, that have got to sit down and begin to answer those questions, to say these elections are elections for what? What end state are these elections defining? What constitutional mechanism are we going to put in place in terms of going forward and have a new constitution? Now, currently, that is not the case, because it's just elections which are not defined, which are based on nothing except the whims of the monarch. Now, transitional arrangements are critical in that they address a number of issues, but I opted just to look at 3 of those issues. Now, before you can go for elections, you needed to sit down and look at certain arrangements, the form of governance that you need between now and those elections. Now, if you have not looked at the form of governance between now and those elections, you'll not be able to participate freely in those elections, because you have not sat down, for instance, to agree in terms of who is going to run those elections, who is going to be in charge of those elections. How are the votes going to be counted? How are the votes going to be protected? Who is going to announce those votes? Are you going to have a situation like ours in South Africa here, to have an independent electoral commission that will be running with those elections? Who appoints the members of that independent electoral commission? Now, the whole process of governance, it means there must be a mechanism through which you sit down, discuss, and agree in terms of those mechanisms. Now, if those mechanisms are not catered for in the current constitution, how do you then implement them? Maybe you needed to agree on an interim constitution before the elections, which interim constitution is going to put certain mechanisms in place, like 1, restraining the security forces from interfering with the activities of political and mass organizations. Now, currently, the security forces have got free rein. If you opt to go for elections, your rallies may easily be disrupted, because the state still controls the security forces, still deploys the security forces. The state may decide to disrupt your rallies when you go for elections. Now, unless you sit down and look at those issues in terms of the interim governance before the elections, what institutions are in place? Who controls those institutions? Are there any aspects of power sharing that may be in place between now and the time of elections? Those are all the issues that you need to look at in terms of the current governance, so that when you speak about elections, then you can freely speak about free and fair elections. How can elections be fair if the whole power is still vested in the monarchy that you are challenging, and all the mechanisms are still controlled by the monarchy that you are challenging? It means the results or the outcome of the elections will be based on the wishes of the monarchy, because the whole governance of the process is controlled by the monarchy. The second issue that we need to look at is political commitment to end the current problem that exists in the country. You have these conflicts that you have. We have the security forces that are rampant in the country. We have organizations that are banned. We have mass activities that are not allowed. Now, if you are to go towards elections, how do you address those aspects? What guarantees are you having that the security forces will not destabilize your activities? What guarantees do you have that you are going to have free rallies and the freedom of speech? You'll say whatever you want to say when you organize your rallies towards the elections. you will not be suppressed because you are using a language which will be considered to be treasonous as far as the monarchy is concerned. If we have comrades in prison, how do you go to elections when we have comrades in prison? And how are those comrades going to be released so that they participate in the process of elections going forward? Now, that is the political side of things that has got to be looked into before you can talk about having elections and having free and fair elections for you to participate in. And then the last part, in terms of the 3 points that I have raised, is the mechanism through which power will be transferred to the party that shall have won the elections. Is there any power that shall have to be transferred to the elected party that shall have won the elections, or whether the power shall still remain with the monarchy, and the monarchy will just delegate certain functions and duties to the political party that shall have won during the elections? Will the constitution remain the same as it is? The party that shall have won those elections, what constitution will that party use to be able to implement its own objectives? Because if you go to any elections as a political party, it means you have your own policies, you have your own programs, you have your own ideology. Now, if the constitution of the country does not allow you to come up with your own policies, with your own ideology, with your own programs, now what authority do you have in the country as a political party that has won the elections? Now, those are the issues that you need to look at. When you talk about those national elections, how are they structured? What purpose do they serve? Will they produce a democratic monarchy, or will they produce a democratic state with several parties, participating in the governance of the country? Now, these are the issues that we need to look at. These are the 3 critical factors that you need to look at, comrades, when you decide you are not participating in these elections. Firstly, it is the interim form of governance, which will determine how those elections are going to be arranged and where power lies to appoint the Independent Electoral Commission and so on. It is the political commitment on the part of the state to make sure that it supports the rallies and everything. It doesn't suppress political parties. It creates a climate for mass mobilization and so on. It creates the climate for freedom of speech. And then thirdly, it is the mechanism through which power will be transferred from where it is now. My assumption is that power currently lies with the monarch. Whether you go to the elections or you don't, power will remain with the monarch. There is no power that will be transferred from the monarch to the party that shall have won the elections, except a delegation of duties in line with the wishes of the monarch. Now, these points that I have raised are basically dependent on a number of issues. First, it is the political will. Secondly, it is the honesty and objectives of the parties involved. Is there a political will on the part of the monarch to say you must go for elections so that power can be transferred to the party that has won? As far as I'm concerned, there is no political will. This is just a gimmick to make sure that what is currently happening in the country is neutralized. Is there any honesty on the part of those who want to go for the elections? As far as I'm concerned, there is none. It is about the question of proximity to resources. Now, these are the critical issues that we need to look at when we talk about your issue in Eswatini in terms of going towards the elections. If you look at what happened in our country, in South Africa, for instance, when we moved from the apartheid regime towards the current dispensation, which we are not happy with currently as well, the ANC as a political party engaged in secret talks with the Boer regime They didn't involve the other mass organizations. They engaged with different structures of the government, the business, political entities in the white community, and so on, including the security agencies. As a single party, as the ANC, it is only when they were certain that the two of them, the ANC together with the Boer government, had reached an agreement and shared a common purpose to be able to move from the apartheid regime to this neo-colonial regime, then they opened it up to the other political parties. And when they opened it up to the other political parties, then they brought in that interim arrangement where all the other parties were brought in to participate so that they could legitimize the process. Then they developed a transitional constitution, which was going to run the country whilst the country's constitution was still being developed. A constitution which was already in place, but they pretended to be developing a new constitution. And also the structures and the mechanism for elections were already defined as well. But through the transitional period, those mechanisms towards the elections were given an image as if they were crafted there. And in the final analysis, it became clear to everybody else that the ANC was going to win the elections because the powers that be had defined the mechanism, which I've spoken about, of the elections and how the elections were going to be managed and how the outcome of those elections was going to be determined. The nature of constitutional reforms were already defined. This is why in our country today, we're still sitting with the problem of neo-colonialism, where we say we're free, but the country still remains in the hands of the white people. It is because the constitutional reforms that were drafted and crafted were done secretly by the ANC and the Boers. That's where the problem is then, like in your case, Napo Eswatini, if you are to go for the elections, when we have no control over the election process, when we have no control over the security forces that will be disrupting you, when we have no control over the funding processes. Now, the funding processes may be taken lightly, but the state may fund its own political parties that it wants to see winning to be able to drive its agenda. Meaning that the play fields will not be leveled. You'll be contesting against the state, which is funding itself when you will be funding yourselves. Now, if those elections are not free and fair, what mechanisms have been put in place for you to be able to challenge the outcome? Now, if you have not sat down to look into those issues and agree on the mechanisms to challenge the outcome of the elections, what is the point of going in and participate in those elections? So it creates a problem. If I may sum up, for me, it is a problem if we are to go for elections without having sat down in a form of a transition to lay down the rules and agree on certain aspects such as the constitutional reform, the management of the elections, and all other aspects that are related to this part. Maybe let me stop there for now. For the other aspects, I will raise them when we enter into discussions, Chair.
Thank you very much, General. Comrades, any comment or questions? I had seen earlier the mics being open. Let's start with you, Comrade Mafafa.
Asibonge Chair, sibonge kuye Comrade General for such analysis. Isivula kakhulu ingcondo this part leadership. Maybe ngekucala kuveta kunakula kuvetile our politically educator here. The monarchy is not willing to resolve conflict and to surrender power so that we can all reach a peaceful state. This is not willing. In the monarchy leyendako, day in and day out, it respond with violence to the people. I khombisi lokho ukuthi uma ayichaza comrade Fihla lana uthi i-transition isho ukuthi si resolve the conflict to a peaceful state, and the monarchy is not willing to do so. That's a part. And kubuya kuyi-question yesibili, kukhona i-question lake ayiphinze wayiveta comrade Fihla uthi lama powers akubani. We can draw back ukuthi kwendekaleni in the current situation. Kuke kwaba with this form yokuthi there is dialogue. But the truth that you can say here today is that dialogue, the monarch is not ready to dialogue with the people. But are the people who want to dialogue with the monarch? The monarch is not ready. In such that terms of reference, even when SADC intervene here, because the president of South Africa is Cyril Ramaphosa, after elections, in 2 days in elections, wasuka South Africa weta kangwane. In our country, wafikela kangwane, wanatha tea with the king, babonana lapha bathi kune dialogue letako after ingcwala. Then ema democratic forces, the progressives in the country, ahlangana under the front called PPA and MSF. Abhala kokuthi what kind of a dialogue ema progressive life. But Cyril Ramaphosa didn't entertain that. Walalela imonarchy ukuthi we must go siye esibayeni, sinasifika esibayeni go amendwa khona lishintsho lonke lekumele silende ethini kumele silende esibayeni. Ngisho ukuthi ema terms of reference onke asetandleni temonarchy. Sho ukuthi is the current situation lesifesako even namanje, because we have cadres as we speak who are behind bars for this, and we also have cadres who are in exile. We have many of our cadres are in jail. Some of them are outside, but they are restricted. They can move outside of the country. Everything, the situation is bad, which means the monarchy is not willing to surrender power. Is Kubantu. That's the current situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any addition, comrades? I don't see any other hand. May I have the mic open? Over to you, comrades.
Thank you, comrade. Thank you, comrade National Chair. My question is actually it's a move a bit. I want to ask comrade Gutsi, like, are you trying to imply the ANC actually went to bed with the apartheid regime, or what happened then? Maybe if I get clarity on that, then my follow-up question will be, is it possible in our struggle that we already have some of these political parties who are already in bed with the monarchy and the monarchy is funding itself through them? Or we might have such a case? Yes, that's my question.
Thank you. I don't see any other mic open. Back to you, Comrade Fihla. Your mic is still off. Comrade.
Yeah, I was still muted, Chair. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now clearly.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Maybe let me start with the questions. If you look at the history of South Africa, starting from the time when the ANC interacted with our enemy, You need to look at the circumstances that existed in the whole world. One, the ANC was weak at the time because the Soviet Union had collapsed, and the major support of the ANC had come from the Soviet Union. Two, Amabhunu were defeated in Angola at Quito Carnival. Three, the Americans were now in charge of the world. They were dictating terms, both Amabhunu and the ANC. Now, in the talks that were held in Angola, which is where the Amabhunu accepted to implement the Resolution 435 as a Namibia, then the issue of South Africa was also agreed upon in Angola. Now, remember, not all political parties were in Angola. Not all political parties were supported by the Soviet Union. And if you look at how the whole process then was implemented, all political parties were released quietly and secretly, particularly the PAC political prisoners. And when it came to release Mandela, it was stage-managed. It became a big occasion that was broadcast throughout the world. Now, everything was properly planned for a particular purpose. How the transitional period was going to be implemented, it was already agreed upon before all other political parties became involved. And in the process, a lot of leaders of the ANC were corrupted. This is how today we're sitting with the problem of corruption in the country. Because the enemy started introducing money into the ANC during that period. This is why Cyril Ramaphosa ended up being a business partner to Ruth Meyer. This is where the origins of the Black Empowerment Program come from, because they were identified leaders and individuals within the ruling party that were supposed to be empowered financially so that they become millionaires. Now that tells you how the ANC was compromised and it ended up finding itself in bed with the enemy. You will remember also that the National Party, which was ruling at the time, broke away and they formed the new National Party, which then joined the ANC. And the leader of the new National Party, Martinus van Schalkwyk, became a member of the ANC. Now, when we have a leadership of the apartheid regime joining the ANC, what does that tell you as well? So it's all the issues that we needed to look at as revolutionary forces. You are correct then when you say, in your case, Ngapo Eswatini, you needed to look at the situation whereby some of your own comrades that you thought were revolutionaries, that they may be in bed with the enemy today. Ask yourself a question, why are others willing to go for those elections when you have not sat down to look at the critical issues in terms of your members and leaders who are in prison, your members and leaders that are in exile, the continued suppression of your activities currently, the unwillingness of the monarchy to engage properly. Ask yourself a question, why? So I'm not saying they are in bed with the monarchy party. These are issues that you need to look into, because in our country, that's why now we're sitting with a South Africa that is a neo-colony, where the wealth of the country is still in the hands of the whites, where the property rights were enshrined in the Constitution. Now, if you look at those property rights, all they served was to protect the power and interests of the white people. Now, a party that accepts that and accepts to become a neo-colony, what does that tell you? It tells you that it is in bed with the enemy. That's what I can say, Chair, in terms of the questions that were asked. In terms of the comments that were raised by my other comrades, the role of Cyril Ramaphosa, as an example. One of the key instruments that you look at good transitional arrangements, it is the influence of the external parties or the international parties. Because the foreign parties or international parties have got an influence in terms of what is going to happen. As we are rightfully saying, Gutu Ramaphosa supported the position of the monarch. Now Ramaphosa becomes a powerful person because South Africa has got so much influence in what is happening in Eswatini. Even if you were to go for elections, who monitors the elections? Usually we put international observers. If Ramaphosa maintains that position and the observers become in South Africa, what do you expect in terms of the outcome of those elections? So this is one of the issues that you look at. I'm clear that the comrade raised this issue of the role of external parties in what is happening up in Eswatini. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, General. Any addition, comrades, as you are coming through, please switch on the mic. I think, General, it's important to highlight that the Tinkundla system has another factor that is quite peculiar. Amakhosi la local who can connive on evictions and making the life bearable to members who are either under the system or who are likely to be elected and don't hold the same position. Lastly, also, as comrades switch on their mics as well, it is interesting that in the past year, there's been an influx of those who used to support the monarch, who are now suddenly part of the desire for multi-party democracy, whereas they were always basically individual supporting, or as parties were in support of the defense of the monarch as it is. Also, the question of the swearing, when you are taking the oath of parliament as a parliamentarian after this kind of elections, what do you then swear to protect? In this case, you swear to protect the monarch, not the nation. You swear to protect the monarchy in its generation after generation. I don't see any comment. Your comment, General?
Thanks for that input. This is why I was saying, if there are no transitional arrangements, there's no way you can then talk about the end state and talk about the elections. Because the constitutional reforms have not been looked into. The constitution remains the same. The monarchy remains the authority. Even if you go for elections, you win the elections, then we are sworn in. Your loyalty is to the monarch, and we have to take an oath to that effect. Meaning that we are not leading the country. We are only implementing the rules of the monarch. We are an instrument of the monarch. Now, that's basically where the problem is. It means there is no transitional arrangement. So the elections are basically a sham, just meant to neutralize the situation and give a different image of the country, which is not. Again, with the number of individuals and parties that we are saying now, they are changing or jumping ship from one position to the other. It is normal. Because what is happening is that because the purse is controlled by the monarch, the power and authority is with the monarch. The instruments of governance are with the monarch. And therefore, those individuals and political parties that see an opportunity in being closer to the monarchy, they will be in bed with the monarch. And they will betray the cause of the revolution that has been there. So it is a normal process that all of us have got to accept. The traditional leaders that we are talking about are part of the current structure of governance. They are part of the constitution. That part of the institutions of governance are these structures called include, meaning that if there are any issues that are to be attended to under the current constitution, those issues have got to be first referred to include, because they are part of the constitutional arrangement. Now, unless you deal with those arrangements constitutionally and through a transitional phase, the status quo will remain the same. You go for elections, you are just going for elections to betray your own people and your own conscience. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, General. We will then come to a close at this stage. You really have opened our minds. We will then give an opportunity to Treasurer General of the NLC Youth League, Comrade Zandi, to close for us this session. Thank you. Comrade Zandile, you are still muted. Comrade Mafafa, do you close for us?
Asibonge National Chairperson, sibonge nakuye Comrade General. I think it's an issue of network with our comrades here. Even the Senate President Sabon Klangena is an issue of the network leadership. Sibonge kakhulu Africa kusivula tincondo ukuthi how are we going to achieve the true democratic Swaziland we want, because we do not want something like a democracy. We want a socialist state. Leadership kusivule kakhulu kusho ukuthi nawo sesinesayeko ukuthi sibuyele phasi, and we have a role ukuthi sihambe conscientize our people bayibone lento njengoba bekayibeka Comrade Fihla. Kubonga nemacabane onke la khona la ukuthi participate kulezo political school. Sibone ngakuwe National Chairperson, sithi nibe nebusuku lobuhle ma-Afrika, izwe lethu.
Africa, son of the sun.